The crimson trail led through the snow like a scarlet ribbon, stark against the white expanse that blanketed the hills outside Prescott, Arizona in the winter of 1878. Kade Brennan pulled his horse to a halt, his breath forming clouds in the frigid December air as he studied the disturbing sight before him. Blood. Fresh blood. Too much of it to belong to a wounded animal, and the narrow, staggering pattern told him it belonged to someone on foot. "Whoa, thunder!" he murmured to his stallion, swinging down from the saddle. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he knelt to examine the trail more closely. Kade was no stranger to tracking 8 years working cattle, and 3 as a deputy had honed those skills, but something about this trail sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. He followed the crimson path, leading Thunder by the reins. The blood drops grew larger, closer together. Whoever was wounded was slowing down, weakening. As he crested a small rise, he saw her. A woman lay crumpled in the snow, a dark coat wrapped around her slender frame, long chestnut hair spilling out from beneath a woolen hat. She wasn't moving. Around her, the snow had turned a deep, alarming red. Kade sprinted the remaining distance, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Miss, can you hear me?" He dropped to his knees beside her, gently turning her over. Her face was pale as the snow around her, lips tinged blue, but she was breathing barely. Blood soaked her left side, and as Kade carefully opened her coat, he found a bullet wound just below her ribs. She couldn't be older than 25, and despite the dire circumstances, he couldn't help but notice her striking features. "Stay with me," he urged, quickly removing his bandana and pressing it against the wound. Her eyelids fluttered at the pressure, a small groan escaping her lips. Kade worked quickly, removing his own coat to wrap around her before gathering her in his arms. She was light, too light and dangerously cold. "I've got you now," he promised, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Just hold on." He maneuvered her onto Thunder, climbing up behind her and cradling her against his chest to share what warmth he could. The nearest town was Prescott, a good hour's ride, and he wasn't sure she had that long. His own ranch was closer, just 20 minutes if he pushed hard. "Let's go, boy," he urged his horse, and they set off at a pace that balanced speed with smoothness, trying not to jostle the wounded woman more than necessary. As they rode, Kade kept one arm firmly around her waist, the other on the reins, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Who did this to you?" he murmured, though he expected no answer. The woman remained unconscious, each shallow breath a small victory. The snow began to fall again, thick flakes swirling around them as Kade urged Thunder faster. The temperature was dropping with the afternoon sun, and he could feel the woman growing colder against him, despite the layers wrapped around her. He needed to get her warm, stop the bleeding, and find out who'd left her to die in the snow. His ranch house appeared through the trees, smoke rising from the chimney where his foreman would have lit the fire in anticipation of his return. Kade had never been so grateful for that plume of smoke, for the promise of warmth it represented. "Sam," he called out as they approached. "Sam, get out here." The door flew open, and Samuel Porter, a man in his 50s who'd worked for Kade's family since before he was born, stepped out onto the porch. His weathered face registered surprise, then alarm as he took in the scene. "Good Lord, what happened?" "Found her bleeding in the snow," Kade explained tersely, carefully dismounting while supporting the woman. "She's been shot. Clear off the table and stoke that fire." Sam moved quickly despite his age, holding the door as Kade carried the wounded woman inside. The warmth of the cabin enveloped them immediately, but she showed no response to the change in temperature. "Who is she?" Sam asked, clearing the wooden table with one sweep of his arm. "No idea." Kade gently laid her down, finally getting a proper look at her face in the light. Even pale and drawn with pain, she was beautiful. But someone wanted her dead. As he removed the layers of clothing to access the wound, he noticed something clutched in her hand, a small locket on a delicate silver chain. Her fingers were curled around it so tightly that even unconscious, she hadn't let it go. "Fetch my medical kit," Kade instructed, "and heat water. Lots of it." While Sam hurried to obey, Kade examined the wound more carefully. The bullet had entered her left side but didn't appear to have exited. She'd lost a dangerous amount of blood, but if the bullet hadn't hit anything vital, she might have a chance. "Stay with me," he murmured, pressing a clean cloth against the wound. "You've made it this far, don't give up now." Her eyelids flickered, and for a brief moment they opened. Eyes the color of summer violets stared up at him, unfocused and clouded with pain. "You're safe," he told her firmly. "I'm going to help you." Her lips moved, forming a word without sound. Then her eyes closed again, and she went limp beneath his hands. "Hurry with that water, Sam." Kade called, feeling for her pulse. It was there, thready and weak, but present. Whoever this woman was, she was fighting to live, and Kade Brennan was determined to make sure she won that fight. As Sam returned with the medical supplies and hot water, Kade steeled himself for what needed to be done. He dug bullets out of men before, an unfortunate necessity in his line of work, but never from someone so close to death's door. "What do you need me to do?" Sam asked, setting everything down. "Hold her still if she wakes," Kade replied, rolling up his sleeves. "And pray." With practiced hands, he cleaned the area around the wound, then reached for the small bottle of whiskey in his medical kit. He poured some over his hands and the forceps, then looked at the woman's unconscious face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is going to hurt." For 3 days, the woman hovered between life and death. The bullet had missed her vital organs by the narrowest of margins, but infection and fever set in despite Kade's careful attention. He barely left her side, sleeping in the chair beside the bed where they'd moved her, waking at her slightest sound to replace the cool cloths on her forehead or coax water between her parched lips. On the morning of the 4th day, as winter sunlight streamed through the window, her eyes opened clear and alert for the first time. "Water," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kade was immediately awake, reaching for the cup on the bedside table. "Easy now," he cautioned, sliding an arm behind her shoulders to help her sit up slightly. "Small sips." She obeyed, drinking carefully before sinking back against the pillows, studying him with those remarkable violet eyes. "Who are you?" Kade Brennan. "Found you bleeding in the snow about 4 days ago." He set the cup aside. "I was hoping you might tell me who you are and who put that bullet in you." She was silent for a long moment, her eyes darting around the room as if assessing her surroundings. Her hand moved to her throat, then dropped to the bedcovers, searching. "My locket. It's right here," Kade assured her, picking up the silver necklace from the bedside table. "You were holding on to it pretty tight, figured it must be important." Relief washed over her face as she took it from him, clutching it in her palm. "Thank you. You're welcome, miss." She hesitated, then said, Zara Thornton." "Miss Thornton," he acknowledged with a nod. "I'd say it's a pleasure to meet you, but I wish it had been under better circumstances." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Most people just call me Zara." "Zara, then." Kade leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You want to tell me what happened?" The smile vanished and fear flickered in those violet eyes. "I can't. I shouldn't be here. I'm putting you in danger just by staying." "Whoever shot you is long gone," Kade said reasonably. "And even if they're not, you're in no condition to go anywhere." As if to emphasize his point, she tried to push herself up further and gasped at the pain, her hand flying to her bandaged side. "See," Cade gently eased her back down. You've got a hole in your side that's barely started healing. You're staying put until Doc Jenkins says otherwise. You brought a doctor. Yesterday, old friend of mine. He said you're lucky to be alive. Cade studied her face. Said the cold probably saved you, slowed the bleeding enough to give you a fighting chance. Zara turned her face toward the window, watching the snow falling outside. I remember the cold, she said softly. I thought I was going to die out there. Nearly did, Cade confirmed. Now, I'm not one to pry into folks' business, but when I find a woman shot and left for dead on my property, I tend to take an interest. She looked back at him, indecision clear on her face. Before she could respond, the bedroom door opened and Sam appeared with a tray. Brought some broth, he announced, then broke into a smile when he saw Zara awake. Well now, look who's decided to join the land of the living. Good morning, miss. This is Sam Porter, my foreman, Cade introduced. He's been helping me look after you. Thank you, Zara said quietly. Sam set the tray on the bedside table. It's nothing fancy, but it'll put some strength back in you. He nodded to Cade. Sheriff Matthews rode by while you were sleeping. Said he needs to talk to you when you've got a moment. Cade frowned. Sheriff Matthews rarely made the ride out to his ranch unless something serious was happening. Did he say what about? Just that there's been trouble in town. Said it might interest you given what you found. Sam gave a meaningful glance toward Zara, who had gone very still. I'll help her with the broth, then ride into town, Cade decided, standing up. Would you mind readying thunder for me? Once Sam had left, Cade turned back to find Zara watching him with renewed wariness. Don't worry, he assured her. I haven't told anyone about you except Doc Jenkins, and he's not one to gossip. The sheriff knows, she said quietly. He knows I found someone wounded, not who or where you are now. Cade sat on the edge of the bed and reached for the bowl of broth. Let's get some of this into you, and then you can decide how much you want to tell me before I head into town. To his surprise, Zara's hand shot out and gripped his wrist with unexpected strength. Please, she said, her voice urgent. Don't tell anyone I'm here. Not yet. Cade studied her face. The fear in her eyes was genuine, and he'd learned to trust his instincts about people. All right, he agreed, but I'll need something in return. What? The truth. When I get back. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. When you get back. As Cade rode toward Prescott, his mind was filled with questions. Who was Zara Thornton? What had she done or what had been done to her that had led to her being shot and left to die? And why was she so afraid of anyone knowing she was alive? The town came into view, a collection of wooden buildings and canvas tents nestled in the valley. Despite being the territorial capital, Prescott was still a frontier town at heart, with all the rough edges that implied. As Cade rode down Montezuma Street, he nodded to familiar faces, noting the increased presence of armed men, not just the usual deputies, but men he recognized as hired guns. He found Sheriff Matthews in his office, a cup of coffee cooling on his desk as he cleaned his revolver. John Matthews was in his early 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard streaked with gray and eyes that had seen too much. Brennan, he greeted, setting the gun aside. Took you long enough. Had matters to attend to, Cade replied, taking a seat across from the desk. Sam said there's been trouble. Matthews nodded grimly. Stagecoach robbery 3 days back, about 15 miles north of town. Driver and guard both killed, passengers robbed of valuables. One passenger missing, presumed dead or taken. Cade's pulse quickened. 3 days ago was when he'd found Zara. Any of the bodies recovered, just the driver and guard, both shot at close range. Matthews picked up a wanted poster from his desk and slid it across to Cade. Recognize him. The poster showed a hard-faced man with a scar running from temple to jaw. The name beneath read Victor Blackwell, with the charges of murder, robbery, and kidnapping listed below. "Can't say that I do," Kade said truthfully. "He's been working with a gang moving between here and Flagstaff. Word is they've been targeting wealthy passengers, particularly those traveling alone." Matthews leaned back in his chair. The missing passenger was a young woman, traveling under the name Sarah Taylor, paid for her ticket in cash, kept to herself according to the other passengers. "Any description?" Kade asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Brown hair, early 20s. One passenger mentioned unusual eyes, purple or violet, they said." Matthews fixed Kade with a pointed stare. "Now about what you found on your property." Kade chose his words carefully. "Found blood in the snow. Followed the trail, but whatever left it was gone by the time I got there. Might have been a wounded deer, taken down by wolves." It wasn't entirely a lie he had found blood in the snow and followed it. What he'd found at the end of that trail was his business until he knew more. Matthew's eyes narrowed. "Sam made it sound like you'd found someone." "Sam talks too much," Kade replied evenly. "If I'd found a person bleeding out on my land, I'd have brought them straight to town." After a moment, Matthews nodded. "Fair enough, but keep your eyes open. Blackwell and his men are still out there and they're dangerous. If they think there might be a witness to what they did to that stagecoach." "I understand." Kade stood, hat in hand. "Anything else I should know?" "Just that there's a substantial reward for information leading to Blackwell's capture. The missing woman, turns out she wasn't just any passenger. Her father's some big railroad investor back east. He's posted $5,000 for her safe return." $5,000 was more money than most men in the territory would see in a lifetime. It explained the increased presence of guns in town, bounty hunters smelling a payday. "I'll keep that in mind," Kade said, turning to leave. "Brennan," Matthews called after him. "Whatever you didn't find out there, just be careful. Blackwell doesn't leave witnesses." Kade nodded and stepped out into the cold air, his mind racing. Zara Thornton and Sarah Taylor. A young woman with violet eyes, shot and left for dead around the same time as a stagecoach robbery. It couldn't be a coincidence. He stopped by the general store to pick up supplies: fresh bandages, a bottle of laudanum for pain, and some suitable clothing for a recovering woman. Mrs. Miller, the storekeeper's wife, raised an eyebrow at his purchases. "Taking up nursing, Deputy Brennan?" she asked as she wrapped the items. "Just restocking," he replied with an easy smile. "Never know when you might need medical supplies out on the ranch." His last stop was the telegraph office, where he sent a discreet message to a former colleague in the Pinkerton Detective Agency. If anyone could provide information about Zara Thornton or Sarah Taylor without attracting attention, it would be James Cooper. The ride back to the ranch seemed longer, the weight of what he'd learned pressing on him. If Zara was indeed the missing passenger, she was now at the center of a manhunt that had nothing to do with her safe return and everything to do with silencing her permanently. As the ranch house came into view, Kade made his decision. Until he knew the full story, he would keep his promise. No one would learn from him that Zara Thornton was alive and recovering under his roof. But he needed answers, and he needed them now. He found Zara sitting up in bed, her chestnut hair brushed and falling in waves around her shoulders. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and she was nibbling at a piece of corn bread that Sam must have brought her. She looked up as he entered, setting the food aside. "You're back," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I am." Kade removed his hat and coat, hanging them on the hook by the door before taking a seat in the chair beside the bed. "And now it's time for that truth you promised me." Zara's fingers worried at the edge of the blanket. "I don't know where to begin. How about with who you really are?" Sarah Taylor, perhaps? Her head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. How did you? There was a stagecoach robbery 3 days ago. Driver and guard killed. One passenger missing, a young woman with violet eyes, traveling under the name Sarah Taylor. Kade leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. The same day I found you bleeding in the snow with a bullet in your side. Zara, or Sarah, closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was resignation in her gaze. My name is Zara Thornton, she said quietly. Sarah Taylor was just a necessary fiction. Why necessary? Because my father is Lawrence Thornton of the Boston and Western Railroad. She looked down at the locket in her hands, opening it to reveal a small portrait of an elegant woman with the same violet eyes. My mother died last year. After her death, my father changed. Became obsessed with expanding his railroad empire, with making powerful connections. He arranged a marriage for me with Victor Blackwell. Kade stiffened at the name. Victor Blackwell, the outlaw. He wasn't known as an outlaw in Boston, Zara explained bitterly. He was a charming investor with interests in silver mines throughout the Arizona territory. He courted my father's favor with promises of exclusive rail routes to his mines. Her fingers tightened around the locket, but I saw through him from the beginning. There was a coldness in his eyes, a cruelty he couldn't quite hide. So you ran, Kade surmised. She nodded. I took what money I could gather and fled west. I thought if I could reach California, I could disappear, maybe find work as a teacher. A humorless laugh escaped her. I was so naive. He found me in Flagstaff, said he would forgive my foolishness if I returned with him willingly. But you refused. I did. So he forced me onto that stagecoach, said we were going to Prescott, where a minister would marry us immediately. Zara's voice trembled slightly. When the robbery happened, I knew it wasn't real. The men were Blackwell's. They killed the driver and guard, then Blackwell dragged me from the coach. He said if I wouldn't be his wife, I wouldn't be anyone's. She touched her bandaged side gingerly. He shot me himself, left me in the snow to die. I don't remember much after that, just the cold and trying to keep moving. I knew if I stopped, you'd freeze to death, Kade finished for her. Yes. She looked up at him, those remarkable eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Now he thinks I'm dead, and it needs to stay that way. At least until I can get far enough away that he'll never find me. Kade was silent for a long moment, absorbing her story. It fit with what he knew of Blackwell from the wanted poster and Matthew's information. A ruthless man who wouldn't accept rejection, who eliminated obstacles permanently. Your father has posted a $5,000 reward for your safe return, he told her. The town is filling with bounty hunters hoping to collect. Panic flashed across her face. I can't go back. If my father gets his hands on me, he'll deliver me straight to Blackwell. The railroad deal means too much to him. I'm not suggesting you do, Kade assured her, but you should know what we're dealing with. Blackwell and his men are still in the area. If they learn you survived, they'll come to finish what they started, she concluded quietly. Yes. Kade stood, pacing the small confines of the bedroom. For now, you're safe here. No one knows you're alive except me, Sam, and Doc Jenkins, and I trust them with my life. Why are you helping me? Zara asked suddenly. You don't know me. Taking me in, keeping my secret, you're putting yourself at risk. Kade stopped pacing and looked at her, really looked at her. Beyond her beauty, which was considerable even in her weakened state, there was a courage and intelligence in her face that stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. I've spent most of my adult life upholding the law, he said finally. But sometimes what's legal isn't what's right. No woman should be forced into marriage, especially not to a man like Blackwell. He smiled slightly. Besides, I went to a lot of trouble to keep you alive. Be ashamed to waste all that effort. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Well, when you put it that way." "You should rest," Kade said, picking up the parcel he'd brought from town. "I brought some things for you: clean bandages, medicine for the pain if you need it, and some clothes. They might not fit perfectly, but they'll be better than my old shirts when you're up and about." "Thank you." She took the package, her fingers brushing his. "For everything." As Kade left the room, he found Sam waiting in the hallway, a concerned expression on his weathered face. "Well," the older man asked quietly, "who is she really?" "Someone who needs our help," Kade replied. "And that's all you need to know for now, old friend." Sam studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But whatever trouble she's in, it's followed you home. Saw fresh tracks in the snow while you were gone, riders circling the property, keeping their distance." Cade's hand moved instinctively to his revolver. Blackwell's men, can't say for sure, but whoever they weren't just passing through. "Double the watch tonight," Kade instructed, "and make sure all the hands are armed." As darkness fell, Kade checked every window and door of the ranch house, placing loaded rifles within easy reach. He instructed the ranch hands to work in pairs and report any strangers immediately. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a clear, moonlit night that would make any approach to the house visible a mixed blessing, as it would also make it easier for watchers to observe the ranch. In the kitchen, he prepared a simple supper of beans, bacon, and coffee. As he worked, his mind kept returning to Zara's story. The desperate flight from a forced marriage, the betrayal by her own father, Blackwell's attempt to murder her rather than accept her rejection. It was a tale straight out of a dime novel, except the danger was real, and the woman upstairs carried the bullet wound to prove it. He was loading a tray to take up to her when he heard the soft creak of floorboards that told him Zara was out of bed. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. She had changed into the simple blue dress he'd brought from town, though it hung loosely on her slender frame. "You shouldn't be up," he scolded gently, setting the tray down. "I've been in that bed for days," she countered, taking a tentative step into the kitchen. "If I stay there any longer, I'll forget how to walk." Kade moved quickly to her side, offering his arm for support. "At least let me help you before you fall and tear open those stitches." She accepted his assistance, allowing him to guide her to a chair at the kitchen table. The simple act of walking down the hallway had clearly cost her. Her face was pale again, a sheen of perspiration on her brow. "Stubborn woman," Kade muttered, pouring her a cup of coffee. "So I've been told," she replied with a small smile. "Usually not as politely." He set the coffee before her, then served up 2 plates of food. "Can you manage, or do you need help?" "I can manage," she assured him, though her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her fork. "It smells wonderful." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Kade noticed that despite her claim of hunger, Zara only picked at her food, managing a few small bites before setting her fork down. "Still too weak for a proper meal," he observed. "Should have started you on broth for a few more days." "It's not that," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "I keep thinking about the driver and guard. They're dead because of me." "They're dead because of Blackwell," Kade corrected firmly. "Not you. If I hadn't run away, then you'd be married to a murderer or dead yourself," he interrupted. "You can't blame yourself for the actions of men like Blackwell." Zara looked up at him, those violet eyes searching his face. "You sound like you speak from experience." Kade hesitated, then nodded. 3 years as a deputy teaches you a thing or two about guilt and blame. I've seen enough good people destroyed by carrying burdens that weren't theirs to bear." "And what burdens do you carry, Deputy Brennan?" she asked softly. The question caught him off guard. Most people in Prescott knew his story or thought they did. It had been years since anyone had asked him directly. The usual ones, he deflected. Failed to save people I should have. Made mistakes that cost lives. He took a sip of his coffee. But we were talking about you, not me. Were we? I thought we were talking about guilt. She shifted in her chair, wincing slightly at the movement. Tell me about Prescott. What kind of place is it? Grateful for the change in subject, Kade described the town, its mix of respectable businesses and rougher establishments. The territorial government offices, the growing population of miners, ranchers, and merchants seeking their fortunes. He told her about the frequent dances at the courthouse, the horse races on Sundays, the community that had formed despite the harsh frontier conditions. As he spoke, he watched her face grow more animated, the shadows in her eyes receding a little. She asked intelligent questions about the economy, the relations with nearby tribal lands, the opportunities for women in the territory. It sounds like a place where one could start fresh, she remarked thoughtfully. Many have, Kade agreed. Though most don't arrive with a bullet wound and a price on their head. She laughed a genuine laugh that transformed her face, making her look younger and unburdened, if only for a moment. I suppose I've never been one for doing things the easy way. The sound of hoofbeats outside interrupted their conversation. Kade was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his revolver as he crossed to the window. Get back to the bedroom, he instructed quietly. Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me or Sam. Zara didn't argue, rising unsteadily to her feet. Be careful, she whispered, then made her way quickly back down the hallway. Kade watched through the window as two riders approached the house, their features indistinct in the moonlight. Behind him, Sam emerged from the back room, shotgun in hand. Expecting anyone? The older man asked. No. Kade checked his revolver, making sure all 6 chambers were loaded. Take the back door. If there's trouble, get Zara out through the root cellar. A knock came at the front door, firm but not threatening. Kade nodded to Sam, who positioned himself where he could cover the entrance while remaining out of sight. Keeping his gun hand ready, Kade opened the door to find Sheriff Matthews on his porch, accompanied by a deputy he recognized as young Ben Collins. Evening, Brennan, Matthews greeted, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Sorry to disturb you so late. Sheriff, Kade acknowledged, not lowering his guard entirely. What brings you out here at this hour? Got word of suspicious activity around your property, Matthews explained. Thought I'd ride out and check on things personally. Kade stepped back, allowing the men to enter. Coffee's hot if you're interested. Wouldn't say no to that, Matthews agreed, removing his hat as he stepped inside. His eyes scanned the room, noting Sam with the shotgun and the 2 place settings on the kitchen table. Having company. Just Sam and me, Kade replied, moving to pour coffee. What kind of suspicious activity are we talking about? Matthews accepted the offered cup. Couple of strangers in town asking questions about you and your ranch. Specifically wanted to know if you lived alone, how many hands you employed, usual routines. He took a sip of coffee. When folks started getting curious about their interest, they claimed to be looking to buy property in the area. But you didn't believe them, Kade surmised. One of them had a scar down the side of his face, Matthews said meaningfully. Matched the description of Victor Blackwell. Kade kept his expression neutral despite the chill that ran through him. The stagecoach robber, what would he want with my ranch? That's what I'd like to know. Matthews set his cup down. Especially since those same men were seen riding in this direction earlier today. We've seen riders keeping their distance, Sam volunteered. Watching the place. Matthews nodded as if this confirmed his suspicions. Blackwell doesn't usually waste time on random targets. If he's interested in you or your property, there's a reason. Cade made a show of considering this information. Could be he's looking for a remote place to hole up. Ranch like this, bit isolated, could be appealing to someone on the run. Could be, Matthews agreed, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Mind if we take a look around? Just to be sure everything's secure. It wasn't really a request. Cade gestured toward the back of the house. Help yourself. Sam can show you the outbuildings afterward. As Matthews and his deputy moved toward the hallway, Cade caught Sam's eye, giving a subtle nod toward Zara's room. The older man immediately engaged Deputy Collins in conversation about recent cattle thefts, steering him toward the back door instead. "I'll check these rooms," Matthews said, reaching for the first door, Cade's bedroom. "Sheriff," Cade called, following him. "Before you go any further, there's something you should know." Matthews turned, hand still on the doorknob. "I'm listening." Cade chose his words carefully. "I wasn't entirely forthcoming in town today. I did find something on my property, a wounded traveler. Doc Jenkins has been out to tend to them." "I see," Matthews said slowly, "and you didn't mention this because they were afraid, and I promised discretion until I knew more about their situation." Cade met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "Now I do, and I think you should meet them." Matthews studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Lead the way." Cade moved past him to the door at the end of the hall, not Zara's room, but a smaller one that had once belonged to his younger brother. He knocked softly. "It's Cade," he called. "You can open up." After a moment, the door swung open to reveal a young man of about 20, his arm in a sling, his face bruised but healing. "Sheriff," Cade said, "meet Thomas Reynolds, stage passenger who managed to escape during the robbery 3 days ago. Been recovering here since I found him wandering my property." Matthew's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He looked from Cade to the young man and back again. "Mr. Reynolds," he greeted cautiously, "that's quite a tale. Mind telling me how you managed to escape when the other passengers reported everyone was accounted for except Miss Taylor?" The young man, one of Cade's newer ranch hands who had conveniently been kicked by a horse the previous week, played his part perfectly. "I was riding up top with the guard, sir. When the shooting started, I was thrown clear. Must have hit my head because next thing I knew the coach was gone and I was alone. Started walking, got turned around in the hills. If Mr. Brennan hadn't found me, I'd have frozen for sure." Matthews frowned, clearly trying to reconcile this new information with what he knew. "And why keep this secret?" "That was my doing," Cade interjected. "Thomas here overheard the robbers talking. He can identify them, including Blackwell. Given what happened to the driver and guard, I thought it best to keep his survival quiet until he was well enough to travel safely to testify." The sheriff considered this, then nodded slowly. "That was risky, Brennan, but I understand your reasoning." He turned back to Thomas. "Mr. Reynolds, I'd like to get your full statement tomorrow if you're up to it. These men need to be brought to justice." "Yes, sir," Thomas agreed readily. "First thing tomorrow." After Matthews and his deputy had inspected the rest of the house and outbuildings, finding nothing else suspicious, they prepared to leave. At the door, the sheriff pulled Cade aside. "I'm not entirely convinced you're telling me everything," he said quietly. "But I know you well enough to trust you've got good reasons for whatever you're holding back. Just be careful. Blackwell isn't someone to underestimate." "I appreciate the warning," Cade replied. "And the visit. Might be best if you and your men keep an eye on the trails leading to the ranch for the next few days. Already planned on it." Matthews settled his hat back on his head. "Good night, Brennan." As the riders disappeared into the darkness, Cade closed and barred the door, then leaned against it with a sigh of relief. Sam and Thomas approached from the kitchen, both looking concerned. "That was too close," Sam muttered. Quick thinking with the stage passenger story, though. It won't hold for long, Kade admitted. Thomas, you'll need to be gone before dawn. Take the south trail to the Wilkins place. Lie low there until I send word it's safe to return. The young ranch hand nodded. What about the statement the sheriff wants? I'll handle Matthews. For now, we need to focus on keeping Zara safe. Speaking of whom, Kade moved quickly down the hall to her real room, knocking softly. Zara, it's me. They're gone. The door opened immediately. Zara stood there, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her face tense with worry. I heard voices. The sheriff? Yes, but he's gone now and I've bought us some time. Kade explained the ruse they had enacted, watching her expression shift from fear to cautious relief. That was clever, she acknowledged. But what happens tomorrow when your ranch hand isn't here to give his statement? By tomorrow, we need to have a better plan. Kade guided her back to sit on the edge of the bed, concerned by how pale she had become again. Blackwell knows I found someone. He doesn't know it's you, but he's suspicious enough to be watching the ranch. Zara clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I should leave. I'm putting you and your men in danger every moment I stay. You're not going anywhere, Kade said firmly. You can barely walk down the hallway without exhausting yourself. Besides, where would you go? In your condition, you wouldn't make it 5 miles. I can't just hide here forever, she protested. No, but you can stay until you're stronger and we have a proper plan. Kade sat beside her on the bed, close enough to offer reassurance without crowding her. Zara, I gave you my word I'd help and I mean to keep it, but you have to trust me. She looked up at him, those remarkable eyes searching his face. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, for she nodded slowly. I do trust you, she said softly. I'm just not used to having someone I can rely on. The simple admission stirred something protective in Kade's chest. Well, get used to it, he said gruffly. Now you should rest. It's been a long day and tomorrow won't be any easier. As he stood to leave, her hand caught his, warm and slender against his calloused palm. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Kade squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Sleep well, Zara, you're safe here. But as he closed her door and moved through the darkened house to check the windows and doors once more, he wondered if he could keep that promise. With Blackwell watching the ranch and Matthews growing suspicious, their time was running out. They needed a plan, and soon. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the fresh snow glittering in the early light. Kade had spent most of the night in the chair outside Zara's door, dozing fitfully, his hand never far from his revolver. Thomas had departed before first light, taking the south trail as instructed. Sam brought coffee and reported that the ranch hands had seen no sign of watchers overnight, but the tracks from the previous day remained. At least 3 riders had circled the property, keeping to the tree line. They'll be back, Kade said grimly, accepting the steaming cup. Likely waiting to see what the sheriff does next. What's our move? Sam asked, leaning against the doorframe. Kade considered their options. We need to get Zara away from here without being seen, somewhere Blackwell wouldn't think to look. Town's out of the question, Sam mused. Too many eyes, too many chances for someone to recognize her from the stage. Agreed. Kade sipped his coffee, the hot liquid clearing the fog of fatigue. What about the old Miller cabin up by Granite Creek? It's isolated, well stocked from when we used it during the fall roundup. She could recover there while we deal with Blackwell. It's remote enough, Sam agreed cautiously, but getting her there without being spotted. We'll go tonight, Kade decided, under cover of darkness. Take the creek bed where the horses won't leave tracks if the weather holds. And what about the sheriff? He'll be expecting Thomas's statement today. I'll ride into town, tell him Thomas took a turn for the worse overnight. Doc Jenkins can back me up, say the head injury was more serious than we thought, needs complete rest. Kade set his cup down. It won't satisfy Matthews entirely, but it'll buy us another day or two. Their planning was interrupted by the soft sound of a door opening. Zara appeared in the hallway, looking steadier on her feet than the previous evening. She had pinned up her chestnut hair and wore the blue dress he'd brought her, cinched at the waist with a length of ribbon to better fit her slender frame. "Good morning," she greeted, her voice stronger than it had been. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Kade assured her, standing to offer his chair. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, taking the seat with a grateful smile. "The pain is less today." Sam poured her a cup of coffee, adding a generous spoonful of sugar without being asked. "Hungry, miss?" "I can rustle up some flapjacks." "That would be wonderful, thank you." As Sam moved to the stove, Zara looked up at Kade. "I heard voices in the night. Was there trouble?" Kade briefly explained the plan they were forming, watching her face carefully for signs of fear or exhaustion. To his surprise, she listened calmly, nodding occasionally, her expression thoughtful rather than frightened. "The Miller cabin sounds like a good solution," she agreed when he finished. "But I'm concerned about the risk to you. If Blackwell suspects you're helping me." "He already suspects I found someone from the stage," Kade pointed out. "My best protection and yours is to keep him guessing about who it might be while we gather enough evidence to bring him in." "Evidence?" Zara looked skeptical. "My word against his won't count for much, especially if my father sides with him. Your word, combined with the bullet that Doc Jenkins removed from your side, plus whatever my contact at the Pinkerton agency can dig up on Blackwell's activities in the East." Kade leaned against the table. "It might be enough for the federal marshal to take an interest, especially if we can link Blackwell to other stage robberies in the territory." Zara considered this, absently turning the locket in her fingers, a habit Kade had noticed she fell into when thinking deeply. Finally, she nodded. "It could work," she acknowledged, "but we need to act quickly. The longer I stay in one place, the greater the chance Blackwell will find me." "Tonight," Kade promised. "I'll ride into town today to set things in motion, and we'll move you after dark." As Sam served up breakfast, they discussed the details of their plan. Zara contributed several practical suggestions that impressed Kade with her quick thinking and resilience. Despite everything she had endured, her spirit remained unbroken, a quality he found himself admiring more with each passing hour. By mid-morning, Kade was ready to depart for Prescott. He checked his weapons, donned his heavy coat, and paused in the doorway of Zara's room, where she sat by the window reading a book from his small collection. "I'll be back before sundown," he told her. "Stay inside, away from the windows. Sam will be close by if you need anything." She looked up, marking her place in the book. "Be careful," she said softly. "Blackwell has eyes everywhere." "I always am," he assured her with a smile that he hoped conveyed more confidence than he felt. "Try to rest while I'm gone. Tonight will be challenging." "Kade," she called as he turned to leave. When he looked back, she held his gaze steadily. "If anything happens, if I'm discovered, I want you to know that these past days, despite everything, have meant more to me than I can express. Your kindness, your protection," she broke off, seeming to search for words. "Nothing's going to happen," he promised firmly. "But I understand what you're trying to say, and the feeling is mutual." The ride into Prescott was uneventful, though Kade remained vigilant, taking a circuitous route and doubling back several times to ensure he wasn't followed. The town was bustling with its usual mix of commerce and frontier roughness, miners and cowboys mingling with government officials and merchants, all going about their business under the winter sun. His first stop was Doc Jenkins' small office on Cortez Street. The physician was just finishing with a patient when Kade arrived. "Brennan," Jenkins greeted him, washing his hands in a basin as the miner he'd been treating departed. "How's our secret patient doing?" "Improving," Kade replied, closing the door behind him. "But we have complications." He quickly outlined the situation: Blackwell's men watching the ranch, Matthew's suspicions, the plan to move Zara to the Miller cabin. Jenkins listened attentively, his weathered face grave. "That young woman is lucky you found her," he said when Kade finished. "Few men would take such risks for a stranger." "She's not exactly a stranger anymore," Kade admitted. "And I need your help. If Matthews asks about Thomas Reynolds, I'll confirm that he suffered a serious concussion and needs complete rest," Jenkins finished for him. "I'm a doctor, not a lawman. Patient confidentiality is my primary concern." "Thank you." Kade hesitated, then asked, "How long before she's fully recovered? From the gunshot, I mean." Jenkins considered the question. "The wound itself is healing well, but she lost a significant amount of blood. That takes time to replenish. I'd say another week before she should attempt any strenuous activity, another month before she's completely healed." He gave Kade a shrewd look. "Why? Planning to move her further than the Miller cabin?" "Just trying to understand our timeline," Kade replied, though in truth, he wasn't entirely sure why he'd asked. Perhaps it was the growing awareness that Zara Thornton was becoming more to him than just someone to protect, a realization both unexpected and unsettling. His next stop was the sheriff's office, where he found Matthews reviewing wanted posters with a harried expression. "Brennan," the sheriff acknowledged, looking up. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten our appointment. Where's Reynolds?" Kade explained the situation as they had planned, Thomas's condition worsening overnight, Doc Jenkins insisting on complete rest, the need to postpone his statement. Matthews listened with growing skepticism. "That's mighty convenient," he observed when Kade finished. "Almost as if someone doesn't want Reynolds talking to the law." "Doc Jenkins can confirm everything I've told you," Kade replied evenly. "You're welcome to speak with him directly." "Maybe I will." Matthews leaned back in his chair, studying Kade with narrowed eyes. "You know, Brennan, in the 3 years we've worked together, I've never known you to be less than straightforward. Until now." "I'm telling you the truth, John," Kade insisted, using the sheriff's first name to emphasize their relationship. "Thomas Reynolds is recovering at my ranch, and when he's well enough, he'll give you his statement about the stagecoach robbery." "And that's all there is to it," Matthews pressed. "Nothing else you want to share, like why Victor Blackwell is so interested in your property?" Kade maintained his composure. "If I knew that, I'd tell you. Maybe he's looking for a place to hide out. Maybe he thinks Reynolds saw or heard something particularly damning. Either way, I'm keeping my guard up." After a moment, Matthews nodded, apparently deciding to let the matter rest for now. "Fair enough. But I expect Reynolds in my office the moment Doc says he's fit to travel. And Brennan," he added as Kade turned to leave, "be careful out there. Blackwell isn't just any outlaw. There's something off about him, something cold." "I've heard," Kade replied grimly. His final stop was the telegraph office, where a message awaited him from James Cooper of the Pinkerton Agency. It was brief, but informative. Blackwell, real name Victor Blackman, stop wanted Boston, Philadelphia, New York, for fraud, extortion, suspected murder, stop pattern of targeting wealthy women, stop avoid at all costs, stop Federal Marshal Jenkins informed, stop arriving Prescott, 3 days, stop. Cooper. Kade read the message twice, committing the details to memory, before destroying the paper. So Blackwell, or Blackman, was known to the federal authorities, and a marshal was on his way to Prescott. This changed things, potentially for the better, though they would still need to keep Zara hidden until Jenkins arrived. As he left the telegraph office, a familiar face caught his eye across the street. Michael Thompson, one of his ranch hands who was supposed to be watching the north boundary of the property. The man was engaged in conversation with a stranger whose back was to Kade, but something about the interaction set alarm bells ringing. Thompson looked nervous, glancing around frequently as they spoke. Keeping to the shadows of the boardwalk, Kade moved closer, trying to get a better look at the stranger. When the man turned slightly, the profile was unmistakable. The scar running down his face identified him as Victor Blackwell. Cold fury swept through Kade. Thompson was betraying them, selling information to Blackwell. The question was, how much had he already revealed? Moving with casual purpose, Kade crossed the street, approaching from an angle that kept him out of Blackwell's direct line of sight. As he drew nearer, he caught fragments of their conversation. "Woman at the ranch," Thompson was saying. "You're certain?" Blackwell's voice was cultured, belying his rough appearance. "Heard Brennan talking with Porter. They're moving her tonight." Kade's blood ran cold. Thompson had overheard their plans. He needed to warn Sam and Zara immediately. Abandoning stealth, Kade strode forward. "Thompson," he called sharply. "Thought you were on watch duty today." Both men spun toward him, Thompson's face draining of color while Blackwell's expression remained coolly composed. "Be boss," Thompson stammered. "I was just—" "Deputy Brennan," Blackwell interrupted smoothly, extending a hand. "Victor Black, I've been inquiring about property in the area. Your man was kind enough to answer some questions about the local terrain." Kade ignored the offered hand, fixing Thompson with a hard stare. "Get back to the ranch, now. We'll discuss your helpfulness later." Thompson didn't need to be told twice. He hurried away, not meeting Kade's eyes. Blackwell watched him go with a faint smile before turning back to Kade. "Loyal help is so hard to find these days, isn't it?" "Depends on what you're offering in return for that loyalty," Kade replied coldly. "Mr. Black, or should I say Blackwell, or is it Blackman?" The smile froze on Blackwell's face. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." Kade stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know what you did to the stagecoach, and I know about the missing passenger." "Tragic business," Blackwell said, his composure returning. "I heard the young lady was likely taken by Indians. A terrible fate." "Is that what you're telling yourself?" Kade's hand hovered near his revolver. "Or is that the story you're spreading to cover what really happened?" Blackwell's eyes hardened, though his smile remained fixed. "You seem very interested in this matter, Deputy. Personal concern or professional?" "Both," Kade answered honestly. "I don't take kindly to murderers operating in my territory. Strong accusation without proof." Blackwell adjusted his coat, revealing the butt of a pistol holstered beneath it. "But then, dead women tell no tales, do they?" The casual reference to Zara's presumed death made Kade's fingers itch to draw his weapon, but he restrained himself. Getting into a gunfight on Prescott's Main Street wouldn't help anyone, least of all Zara. "I'd be careful with threats, Blackwell," he advised instead. "Sheriff Matthews is already suspicious of your interest in the area." "Is he?" Blackwell seemed genuinely amused. "Well, I'm sure once I explain my legitimate business interests, those suspicions will evaporate. After all, I'm a respected businessman with connections in Boston that reach all the way to the governor's office." His gaze sharpened. "Unlike some local deputies who might find themselves suddenly without position or influence." The implication was clear. Blackwell had the power to cause trouble for Kade through his political connections. It was a warning, but also a confirmation of what Zara had told him about her father's eagerness to do business with Blackwell. "Enjoy your stay in Prescott," Kade said, deliberately turning away. "Brief as it might be." As he walked back to where Thunder was hitched, Cade's mind raced. Thompson had revealed their plans to move Zara tonight. Blackwell now knew there was a woman at the ranch, though hopefully not yet that it was Zara. They needed to change their strategy, and quickly. The ride back to the ranch was tense, Cade pushing Thunder harder than usual, scanning the horizon constantly for signs of pursuit. He took an even more circuitous route than before, using the creek beds and rocky outcroppings to obscure his trail. When the ranch house finally came into view, he was relieved to see no obvious signs of disturbance. Sam met him at the barn, shotgun in hand. "Thompson." The foreman asked grimly, reading Cade's expression. "Talking to Blackwell in town," Cade confirmed, dismounting. "He told him about Zara and our plans to move her tonight." Sam cursed colorfully. Never did trust that boy. Too eager to please, too loose with his tongue. "Where is she?" "Inside, packing what little she has. She insisted on helping prepare for tonight." Sam took Thunder's reins. "What's our move now? We don't wait for dark," Cade decided. "We leave immediately, using a different route than we planned. Send 2 men as decoys along the original path to the Miller cabin. Make it look like we're still following that plan. And the real destination," Cade considered their options. "The old mine shaft on the North Ridge. It's defensible, stocked with emergency supplies, and the last place anyone would expect us to hide a recovering woman." Sam nodded. "I'll ready the horses. The small bay mare should do for Miss Thornton, gentle enough but sure-footed in rough terrain." "Good." "And Sam," Cade clasped the older man's shoulder, "if anything happens to me, get her to Federal Marshal Jenkins. He's arriving in Prescott in 3 days. Cooper sent word." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Sam replied gruffly, "but I'll see it done if need be." Inside, Cade found Zara in the kitchen, placing wrapped parcels of food into a saddlebag. She looked up as he entered, her expression brightening. "You're back early," she observed, then frowned as she took in his tense posture. "What's wrong?" Quickly, he explained what had happened in town, his encounter with Blackwell, Thompson's betrayal, the need to change their plans immediately. Zara listened without interruption, her face growing pale but her eyes remaining steady. When he finished, she nodded once, decisively. "How soon can we leave?" "Within the hour," Cade replied, relieved by her composure. "Can you ride?" "It's rougher terrain than we originally planned." "I can ride," she assured him. "It will hurt, but I can manage." She hesitated, then added, "Cade, if Blackwell knows I'm alive, he won't stop until he finds me. You and Sam should let me go alone. I can find my way to the next town, perhaps catch a train." "Absolutely not," Cade interrupted firmly. "You're still recovering. Blackwell has men watching the trails, and I made you a promise. We're in this together now." Something in his tone must have convinced her, for she didn't argue further. Instead, she stepped closer and, to his surprise, placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "You are a rare man, Kade Brennan," she said softly. "I only hope my presence doesn't cost you everything you've built here." The touch of her hand, warm against his face, sent an unexpected surge of emotion through him. Before he could respond, Sam appeared in the doorway. "Horses are ready," the foreman announced, "and I've sent Williams and Cooper out as decoys, making a show of preparing the Miller cabin." "Good." Cade reluctantly stepped back from Zara, focusing on the practical matters at hand. "Let's move quickly." Within 30 minutes, they were mounted and ready to depart. Zara sat atop the small bay mare, her face set with determination despite the pain that Cade knew she must be feeling. She wore his spare coat over her dress, the sleeves rolled up to accommodate her slighter frame, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low to shadow her distinctive features. "Stay close," he instructed her as they set out. "The path is narrow in places, and we'll be moving fast." She nodded, gathering the reins with confidence that suggested she was more experienced with horses than he might have expected from a Boston socialite. "Lead on." The first hour of their journey passed without incident. They rode north, staying within the tree line where possible, crossing exposed areas at a gallop to minimize their visibility. Zara kept pace admirably, though Kade noticed the tightness around her mouth that betrayed her discomfort. As they began the ascent toward the ridgeline where the abandoned mine was located, Sam, who was riding point, suddenly raised his hand in a signal to halt. "Riders," he said quietly, gesturing toward the valley below them. Kade and Zara guided their horses beside him, staying within the cover of the pines. From their elevated position, they could see 3 men on horseback moving along the trail that led toward the Miller cabin. "Blackwell's men," Zara whispered. "Most likely," Kade agreed grimly. Following the decoys, they watched as the riders continued down the valley, apparently unaware of the group observing them from the ridge. Once they were out of sight, Sam turned to Kade. "They'll realize it's a false trail soon enough," he warned. "By then, we'll be well hidden," Kade replied. "Let's keep moving." The mine entrance was concealed behind a growth of scrub pine, invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. Kade had discovered it years ago while tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on his cattle. Since then, he had maintained it as a potential shelter in emergencies, keeping it stocked with basic supplies. "It's not much," he apologized as they dismounted, tethering the horses in a small clearing sheltered by overhanging rock. "But it's dry, relatively warm, and no one knows about it except the 3 of us." "It's perfect," Zara assured him, though he noticed she was leaning heavily against her horse, her face pale with exhaustion. Sam disappeared into the mine entrance, emerging a few minutes later with a lantern lit. "All clear inside. No sign anyone's been here since we restocked last fall." Kade turned to help Zara, only to find her swaying on her feet, one hand pressed to her wounded side. "Zara, I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice was faint. "Just need to catch my breath." Before she could protest, he scooped her up into his arms. "Save your strength," he murmured. "You've done remarkably well to make it this far." Too exhausted to argue, she let her head rest against his shoulder as he carried her into the mine. The entrance opened into a small chamber that had once been the miners' shelter. A crude table and chairs stood in one corner, a stone fireplace built into the rock wall, and several cots lined the back wall. It was simple but serviceable. Kade gently set Zara on one of the cots. "Rest now," he instructed, covering her with a blanket. "Sam and I will bring in the supplies and see to the horses." She caught his hand before he could move away. "Thank you," she whispered, her violet eyes luminous in the lantern light, "for risking everything for me." "Some things are worth the risk," he replied softly, squeezing her hand before releasing it. As Kade and Sam worked to bring in their supplies and settle the horses in the small cave adjacent to the main chamber, he found his thoughts repeatedly returning to the woman resting inside. Against all odds and his own better judgment, Zara Thornton had become more than just someone to protect. She had become someone he cared for deeply. The realization should have alarmed him. Their situation was precarious, her future uncertain, and his own life now complicated by his opposition to a man as dangerous as Blackwell. Yet instead of regret, he felt a sense of rightness, as if finding her bleeding in the snow had been not just a matter of chance, but of destiny. "You're falling for her," Sam observed quietly as they worked. It wasn't a question. Kade didn't bother to deny it. "That obvious? Only to someone who's known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper," the older man replied with a slight smile. "Can't say I blame you. She's quite a woman, brave, smart, and prettier than a sunset over the Bradshaws." She's also running for her life and planning to disappear as soon as she's able, Kade reminded him and himself. Sam shrugged. Plans change, especially when the heart gets involved. When they returned to the main chamber, they found Zara asleep, her chestnut hair spread across the pillow, her breathing deep and even. The journey had exhausted her, but her color was better than Kade had expected. "I'll take first watch," Sam offered. "You get some rest. Been a long day." Kade nodded gratefully, settling into a chair positioned where he could see both the entrance and Zara's sleeping form. Despite his intention to remain alert, the events of the day soon caught up with him, and he drifted into a light sleep. He dreamed of Zara not wounded and afraid, but laughing, her violet eyes bright with happiness as they rode together across open meadows. In the dream, she turned to him, saying something he couldn't quite hear, reaching out her hand to him. A sound at the entrance jolted him awake. Sam was there, rifle ready, peering out into the darkness. "What is it?" Kade asked quietly, moving to join him. "Thought I heard something," Sam murmured. "Might be nothing, might be trouble." Kade drew his revolver and stepped outside, scanning the surrounding forest. The night was clear, stars visible through the pine branches, the air cold and still. Nothing moved, yet he felt the same unease that had alerted Sam. "Check on the horses," he instructed. "I'll circle the perimeter." Moving silently through the underbrush, Kade made a wide loop around their hiding place. At first, he found nothing amiss, but as he completed the circuit, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness of the forest. Kade froze, watching. The shadow moved again, resolving into the shape of a man leading a horse carefully through the trees. Behind him, two more figures followed, their approach silent and deliberate. Blackwell had found them.